Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Japanese Breakfast for Melancholy Brunettes and Sad Women. The weird thing about being lukewarm on an act that gets a ton of critical acclaim is that when the critics seem to turn on a project where they've placed higher expectations, it leaves me on the outside looking in, and in a bit of a weird place. Does it become validation for what I've been hearing since the very beginning, or paradoxically, do I wind up liking it more? So as the critic who thought Jubilee by Japanese Breakfast was good but by no means great, lacking a lot of refinement across the board from production to Michelle Zauner's vocal delivery, watching a number of critics come down surprisingly hard on this, calling it a slight and underwhelming follow-up 4 years later, where the most defense I've really heard is that it's more of an exhausted, self-aware slow burn, it was a little bit surprising. And thus for me, well, it's kind of odd. I hear some of those critiques, but I'm a little bit surprised that a more obvious comparison hasn't been mentioned. Mitski, not just in how the crescendo on Here Is Someone reminds me a little bit of a more delicate geyser that never explodes, but specifically the progression from her slightly ragged poppy pivot on Laurel Hell in 2022 to the soft focus, elegant, borderline country touches of The Land Is Inhospitable and So Are We in 2023, where the biggest difference here is Zauner getting a name producer with Blake Mills in order to bring together a little more refinement. And slow burn is the appropriate description for this project. I've heard some describe it as a meditation on the weariness that comes as a factor of fame and overexposure, especially the precarity in which it all might fall apart, but the better word might be domestic retreat, where you can tell Zauner is using the forced introspection to peel into her insecurities and her yearning, and the men she might love but who just refuse to do the same. And that goes for both partners and family. As the centerpiece of the album are the two songs Little Girl and Leda, the first from the perspective of a distant alcoholic father, and the latter where they finally reconnect in a beautiful soft focus moment, which echoes a real conversation that Zauner had with her own father after years of not speaking. Now, if you might question whether some of that soft focus, country flavored, pining domesticity, that it doesn't feel apropos right now, I'd understand, but I'd also push back and say this is more complicated than that. Coaxed through a lot of ancient Grecian myth and art references, the lead single Orlando in Love pulls the titular character through a hodgepodge of literary references and gender in order to embrace that feminine sensitivity, and then following it with the weary acoustic shoegaze / Britpop lament and getting cheated on with honey water, and then the quietly scathing dissection of hypermasculine insecurity on Mega Circuit from the maternal point of view and figure who has had to live amongst that space and also find ways to coax men away from some of that toxicity, if she even can. But it doesn't stop there. I like how Picture Window has her address her own intrusive thoughts of her loved ones dying, and then the slight tension that comes with the man who doesn't have some of those thoughts to the same extent, and her loving that person, which is both frustrating and relieving. And then Men in Bars is strewn with romantic misadventures, but eventually has her confessing and attempting some level of reconciliation in a duet with Jeff Bridges, of all people. I wasn't really wowed by his reedy delivery, but he actually acquits himself pretty well. It's a decent song. If I have a complaint with the writing, it's how some songs feel a little bit underdeveloped on both the front and back end of the album. I like how she explores the complicated projection where her partner wants her to be a little bit more than, well, just the album's title, but it feels like it never fully sticks the landing. The song kind of ends and feels abbreviated. There is an emotional complexity to the feminine expectations that she's tracing across the album, but they can feel kind of diffuse or relying more on vocal presentation that I still don't think Zauner can effectively deliver, at least not situated further back in this mix, which requires a more strident singer. Again, I still don't hear what makes her all that special as a singer, and for a more intimate presentation, I gotta be honest, it's still not clicking. And this is where we get to the sticking point for me. Blake Mills is a really good producer. This is easily the most refined and balanced palette Japanese Breakfast have had to date, especially with the warmer warmer guitars and the strings, and I love the thrumming balance he provides in his low end, but compositionally this is just nowhere near as tight, which is odd to say about an album that barely runs over a half hour, but it's also not helped by songs like Orlando in Love and Winter in LA that really could have used a little bit more to flesh it out, or just some stronger hooks. It's got moments, the shuffling bounce that purposefully tiptoes around the uncanny valley on Mega Circuit, but also has some welcome spacey twang on Picture Window. But if you're left thinking this album is short on the flair or the distinctive moments that made Jubilee special, or that's a little bit underpowered compositionally, yeah, I certainly get it. And that places me as a critic in a bit of an odd place with this album. I don't hear that much of a downgrade as some have implied, more a slight lateral move to accentuate the stronger writing and more refined production, where I'm still largely lukewarm as a whole. It doesn't bring me a lot of pleasure to say, "I told you so," to folks who may have overrated Jubilee at the time and who are not connecting with this, partially because of previously overlooked issues that I might have highlighted, but also mostly because they're not going to put in the time to appreciate some of those finer details. Ironically, that ties into some of this album's metatext, especially when it comes to communication. As such, I think it's probably going to work for a smaller niche audience, probably more of women, hence the self-aware title, and that's fine too. I'm okay saying that Japanese Breakfast made a pretty good album, but I don't think this act is really for me longer term. If you're curious, I think it is worth a couple deeper listens. There's more going on beneath the surface than some will say. I still say it's worth a shot. Give it a listen. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Funnily enough, I know that some people would not have seen my original Japanese Breakfast review I did back when I was running On the Pulse and bucketing a bunch of reviews together. I got a link that comes up earlier here. Please make sure to check it out if you want my further thoughts on this. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in getting projects on my schedule, helping me support the channel, or hell, just yelling at me on my Discord, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships are right over there. Don't feel obligated, tough times out there, I certainly get it. The option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.